Hello, and welcome to my study on theology. This is Theology with Matt. My name is Matt. The purpose of my channel is to provide you with basic understanding of theological terminology. Today's lesson is on the foundation or foundational knowledge behind what theology actually is and what it means. There may be times when I have to teach doctrine so that you have a better understanding of different theological words. Today's lesson is mainly focused on the basic foundational knowledges of what theology is. Hopefully you enjoy this video, and I will probably refer to it several times throughout as I go along. So if you ever need to rewatch this, I would encourage you to do that. So today I want to talk about what theology actually means. But before I do that, I need to tell you about some root structures, some basic root structures, what words are, and how words are formed. I am not a grammar student. I am not a grammar professor. I know enough to be able to get you by. I know the basics pretty good, but I am not one to teach you grammar. That is not my strong suit at all. In basic word structure, you have the root of the word, and you have a prefix, and you have a suffix. Sometimes it's just a root word. Sometimes they add just a prefix. Sometimes they add just a suffix. Sometimes they add multiples of each. The word prefix and suffix, the root word of that is the word affix, which means to attach. And pre means you attach it before the root. And the su means that you attach it after the root. It goes at the end of the word. And when you're adding a prefix or a suffix, sometimes letters are dropped, sometimes letters are added, sometimes letters are changed. I am not the guy to teach you why letters are added, subtracted, or changed. That is not my strong suit. There are plenty of people out there who would be more than happy to explain all that to you. But suffice to say that sometimes when you're adding a prefix or a suffix, letters are dropped or added or changed, but the meaning and the definition of the root word remains the same. The different prefixes and suffixes add to the meaning of the root, and together they become a new word. So the first word I want to talk about in this regard is the word theology, which, if we're going to learn theology, we ought to know what the word theology means. The root word of theology is the Greek word theos. Theos. That's the English spelling of the word theos. Naturally, theos would be spelled in Greek since it is a Greek word. That is the root of the word theology. So what happens to the S? I've asked this, and there were different grammar students that gave me this really long explanation, but suffice to say, it goes back to the rules of grammar that when you're adding a suffix or a prefix, sometimes letters are dropped, sometimes letters are added, sometimes letters are changed, and that's what happens with the word theos, which is the Greek word for God or deity, when you are adding the suffix logy, and that is a Greek word for logos, which is Greek for word. In English, we say word. In Greek, they say logos. And it is either spoken or written or thought. But that is what logos means, words. So, theology would be God word. That's the more literal translation. We see that suffix ology, and we have been taught to understand it means the study of, which is very coincidental because in order to study God, you need to read God's word. So to understand theology, you need to understand God's word, which I think is fantastic. So then that leads to a different suffix, the suffix ist, and that is a person who believes. So a theist is someone who believes in God. Now is when we get to add prefixes. There is the Greek prefix a, there is the Greek prefix mono, and there is the Greek prefix poly. The Greek prefix a refers to the number 0. So an atheist or atheist is someone who believes there are 0 gods. A mono refers to 1. So a monotheist is someone who believes there is only one God. Poly is the Greek prefix that means many. So a polytheist is someone who believes there are many gods. And the Greek prefix die would also come into play there, but they've kind of lump summed everything that is greater than 1 into the word poly for the purpose of theist. I suppose you could be a ditheist, which is someone who believes there are only 2 gods, but that has been lumped into the category of polytheism. So an atheist is someone who believes there is 0 gods, or that God is not real, he does not exist. There are different forms of atheist, and then that brings us to the suffix ism, which a more basic understanding of that is the doctrine of. So atheism would be the doctrine believed by an atheist. Monotheism would be the doctrine believed by a monotheist, so forth and so on. The doctrine of atheism, there are different forms, and there are different forms of monotheism, and there are different forms of polytheism. The most basic form of atheism is they say that God is just a construct of man's imagination, that men felt the need to point to a higher authority, so they created this construct of God so that they can claim in the name of God a particular set of moral values. That is the most basic form of atheism. The Bible in Psalms, and I forget the exact reference offhand, but the Bible in Psalms speaks of atheism this way. Only a fool says in his heart, there is no God. So atheism is foolishness. Someone who claims to be an atheist, according to scriptures, is a fool, because only a fool says in his heart there is no God. And so atheism is foolishness. Polytheism is basically idolatry, because in Exodus chapter 20, God starts off his introduction to what we call the Ten Commandments. I alone am God, and besides me there are no others. And when he gets into his what we call the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, which means you should not bring the Lord's name to nothing or make it void. We could also say that to take the Lord's name in vain is to call on his name when we weren't actually wanting to talk with God. And this is where we get the different forms of using God's name as a swear word. But that is taking the Lord's name in vain. But then God also says, thou shalt have no other gods before me, or besides me. So you worship God, and you worship God and God alone, for there is only one God according to scriptures, which is what I personally believe. And so to believe or worship other gods is a form of idolatry. And there is the next of the Ten Commandments says, thou shalt not make any graven images, nor shalt thou worship them. So again, it's a reinforcement of there is only one God, and if you worship any other god, you are worshiping an idol, which makes you an idolator, and you are practicing idolatry. And so therefore, a polytheist is an idolatrist. And so and there are different forms of polytheism. But going back to atheism, there are those who outright deny the existence of God, and that is one form of atheism. Another form of atheism is people who claim they believe there's a God, but they have no fear of God in them, and so they live their life as if there was not a God. They live their life as if God did not exist. They do not pray. They do not read the Bible. They do not go to church. And if they go to church at all, it's just to keep up appearances. Easter, Christmas, funerals, weddings, and that's pretty much it. But they live their life however they want, because they do not have a genuine fear of God in them, and that is a different form of atheism. Not that you're professing that you believe there are no gods from your lips, but you are professing that from your actions, which is a different form of atheism. And perhaps it is the more dangerous form of atheism, because there's no logic behind it other than you just do not have fear of God in you. There are different forms of monotheism. The God that the Jews worship, the God that the Christians worship, which is the God that I worship, is Yahweh. And there is the God that the Islam or the Muslims believe, and that God's name is Allah, and that God is a different God than Yahweh. Allah and Yahweh are not the same God. So you may claim that they're the same God, but they are not. and I want to make sure that everybody understands that point thoroughly. And then we see many examples of the different forms of polytheism. You have the Greeks who they worship Athena. You have Zeus, and you have Thor, and you have the Vikings, which Thor would be a Norse god. Then you have the gods that the Romans worshipped. You have the gods that the Egyptians worship. And there are all these different sets of gods. And they believe that there are multiple gods. There is the primary god, and then there's the god who controls the weather, the god that controls the heart, the god that controls the harvest. All these different forms of polytheism. So that's your basic understanding of what a theist is. Theist is one who believes in God. Atheist believe there are 0 gods. Monotheist believe there is only one God. Polytheist believe there are many gods. That is your basic form of theists and the many different doctrines. And there are different forms of each. So hopefully that is going to help you in understanding what theology is. And doctrine is based on your theological beliefs. So no matter which doctrine you believe, it has its root or its fundamental root in your theistic viewpoint, whether you're atheistic, monotheistic, or polytheistic. Doctrine just is what you believe and why you believe it. And as we go through, I will be teaching you what these different terms, these different theological terms are. I will tell you up front, I am a born-again believer, and I follow monotheistic, and the God that I worship is Yahweh. So hopefully this helps you, and I will try to get scriptures available so that when you're watching this, you will be able to reference those scriptures. And hopefully you find this channel helpful in your walk with God, or you're trying to understand theology. And the primary purpose of this channel is so that you at least have a clue what people are saying when you hear them use these theological words, these theological terminology. Sometimes I've wondered why it's not taught in the church, and a lot of people believe that the common people would not understand theology. Well, I believe that they would understand theology if someone tells them what, or teaches them what these theological terms mean. Some pastors do that, some do not. But on this channel, that is my goal, to teach you what theology is. All right. I hope you find this helpful. May God bless.